Hi there, my name's Jesse. I'm one of the actors from the 2020 summer festival season at Pitlochry. Um, but as well as that, I also am a freelance theatre director and do quite a lot of directing and teaching at a drama school down in London called Central, where I trained myself. And the thing I've been teaching most recently at Central has been an evening course in Shakespeare. Now, obviously, Shakespeare is a figure that you're very likely to come in contact with as an actor at some point, particularly if you're an actor applying for drama school. For instance, you're often asked to prepare a classical speech or a Shakespeare speech for those auditions. Incidentally, I also sit on the audition panel at Central quite often for the BA Acting Collaborative and Devised Theatre course. And so today I just wanted to share three key tips that I find really helpful as an actor or indeed as a director when I'm approaching Shakespeare, because it's a subject that can often feel quite intimidating, it can feel quite alien to us as modern actors, and inevitably there's so much to cover that there's no way you can go into great depth in a 5-minute video, but perhaps these three little pointers can be useful things to bear in mind if you do find yourself having to come into contact with Shakespeare at some point in the coming weeks or months. Now, one of the first things we need to think about when we're approaching a piece of Shakespeare text is where to breathe and where to pause, particularly as often the thoughts can feel quite long and quite complicated in his language and in his plays. And in general, the rule we try and apply is that we wait until the end of a line before we take the breath and the inevitable little accompanying pause that comes with it. Now, the reason for this is mainly because a lot of Shakespeare's work, not all of it, but a lot of it, and particularly a lot of these really famous speeches, is written in what's called blank verse. You don't need to worry about that too much. All it means is that his lines tend to have 10 beats in them. Now, when an actor's performing the text really, really well, we don't usually hear this as a modern audience. It's hidden from us, but it is there, that natural 10-beat structure underneath the surface of the language. So, for example, let's take Romeo's speech when he sees Juliet for the first time on her balcony getting ready for bed shortly after they've met, and he's completely besotted with her. The first couple of lines go like this: "But soft, what light through yonder window breaks? It is the east, and Juliet is the sun." Now, there's no obvious rhythm there at first sight, but if we look carefully and listen, it is hiding underneath the language. It goes like this: "But soft, what light through yonder window breaks? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And with the next line as well: "It is the east and Juliet is the sun. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So there's 10 beats in the line. Now, as modern actors, we don't need to do a huge amount about that. It's certainly not about speaking the text slavishly to that rhythm. But if we know that it's there, it does impose an encouragement on us to try and not interfere with it too much, and particularly not to interfere with it by planting big fat pauses in the middle of those lines where they're not meant to be. For example, it might be tempting for me to start that first line of Romeo's text with a pause in the middle of the line. But soft, what light through yonder window breaks? However, even though there's nothing massively wrong with that at first sight, if we do it too much, it can really start to mess with the natural dynamics that are inherent in these speeches and start to break up the sense of them, our ability to understand them as an audience, and quite frankly, we can get very bored very quickly if we don't obey the natural rhythm that is there to drive the language forward, drive the plot forward, and keep the character and the audience making these discoveries that are essential to the journey of his plays. So, as an actor, I'd encourage you when you're approaching the speech for the first time, and it may feel artificial to begin with, but keep going with it, to wait until the end of the line, and it will be really obvious on the page usually where the end of the line is, to take that breath and that tiny little pause for thought while the character looks for the next idea. And if you do that, generally what tends to happen is that you'll start to really make discoveries about the emotional state of the character, about what may be going on at that point in the play, and about their need to keep speaking, to keep exploring, to keep working out the ideas they're grappling with very organically. That will just happen because it is there in the language naturally, rather than you having to work too hard to chase after it. So trust the language, trust the rhythm that's hiding underneath the surface, and don't take pauses unnecessarily which might interfere with that. That's the first rule. The next thing we need to think about is, what's the journey of the speech? What state of mind is the character in at the beginning, and how are they changed by the end? And the bigger we can make that change in general, the more exciting it will be. Now, often it's tempting for us as actors to feel like a Shakespeare character is speaking a speech because they have these beautiful ideas or these beautiful plans all mapped out, and they're just letting us in as an audience into their mindset and what they plan to do next in the play. However, it's much more interesting, and it's a subtle difference but an important one, if you can try in general as an actor to think that the character actually doesn't have it all mapped out, that the reason the speech takes 20 lines and not 2 lines is precisely because at the start of it they have no idea what they're going to do. They're faced with a dilemma or a problem, some sort of intractable issue that they haven't yet found the solution to. And the way they work it out is by speaking to us as an audience. Or indeed, if the character's got 2 or 3 other characters they're speaking to in the scene, they work it out by speaking with those characters and almost workshopping their ideas and their solutions. So let's take Macbeth, for example. He has a famous speech that begins like this: "To be thus is nothing, but to be safely thus. Our fears in Banquo stick deep." And that's him essentially saying, what's the point of me being king if I don't feel secure and safe in my kingship? And I'm worried and afraid about what my friend Banquo is going to do next. Because at this point in the play, he's worried that Banquo is going to expose him as being a murderer. So he starts the speech with a problem. And by the end of the speech, he's decided, in fact, that he's going to murder his best mate, Banquo. Now, you could do that he has that all planned out from the start and he's just telling us this great Machiavellian scheme he's come up with. That's fine, and it's quite tempting to take that approach. But generally, as an audience, it's much more exciting if we feel like we're involved in the plan, involved in that working out process, that we meet a character who is stuck at the beginning of the speech and has found a solution by the end of it. And that dilemma is actively, as I say, worked out with us. So, when you're approaching the speech, look for what's the journey, where are they at the start, and what's the problem that they haven't yet solved. Put yourself in the mindset, the solution is still waiting to be found, and then make your audience, and it might be imagined audience members you have to think about if you're in an audition situation, for example, but make your audience, whether they're over there or over there, absolutely vital to solving this problem. You're looking for the answers with them. What do I do about this problem? How do I solve it? And gradually, over the course of the speech, the answer starts to drop in and clarity starts to emerge. That's really exciting for us to watch in real time. The final piece of advice that I would give, and it's a really simple one, but a really, really important one, is to use your own voice. Try and resist the temptation to go into the Shakespeare voice. We all do it sometimes, and it's really common. You hear it all the time when you're listening to actors doing Shakespeare, particularly in an audition situation where you may be really, really nervous. But we put on this kind of high-pitched Shakespeare voice which doesn't feel like our own, feels a little bit genteel and a little bit above the language and maybe a little bit more poetic than how we would usually speak as a real person, and it's really, really difficult to listen to. It creates a real disconnect for us as an audience because we know that's not the real person speaking. We know that's not how they'd speak to us if they were telling us about how they got to work that morning. And what we want to hear, what will bring this language and these 500-year-old characters to life, is your authentic connection to Hamlet or your authentic version of Cleopatra. It has to be unique. It has to be you. And that starts from the voice. It starts with you using your own voice and not putting on a version of how Shakespeare should sound or might sound that's kind of polite or sanitized in some way. and inevitably creates a disconnect. So if you feel yourself starting to experience that disconnect when you're rehearsing, take a moment, go back to the text and try reading it really quietly, really, really slowly, really, really quietly. Let your voice drop into where it would usually sit and rediscover that connection of how you would authentically say these words if you were just speaking as yourself, not a version of a character or a Shakespeare kind of person or actor. So be strict with yourself about that. Try and use your own voice. Really, really important.